You're live.
Good morning. This is Senate Transportation Committee. It's Friday, January 19th. We are going to be going over the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill, annual rite of passage. And today we have Ledge Counsel Anthea Dexter Cooper that's going to run us through the bill. So take it away, Anthea.
Okay, so for the record, Anthea Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel. You can find this bill posted under my name on today's date. So just as a reminder, and this is why you see this little disclaimer at the top, the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill, the first version of it always originates from the Department of Motor Vehicles. I've been working with them over the last month or so. That's why we're up to draft 4.1. They added some things. And my work here is really just to try and have it conform to the way that we draft things, whereas all of the ideas, the policy justifications, everything like that is going to come from the Department of Motor Vehicles. As I do my walkthrough, I will do just sort of a little bit like, this is the problem they're trying to solve as I understand it, but any like real details on like why it's a problem and why this is the solution that they think makes sense, that's the department's job to explain to you. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to be talking about with sections 1 and 2 has to do with the definitions of dealers and transporters and what dealers and transporters can do. So you currently have in Vermont, there are people who are making or repairing a limited number of cars or trucks per year, and they would therefore not qualify as a dealer under the definition of dealer in 23 VSA section 4 subdivision 8. And that's because there are these like business thresholds, and for cars and trucks engaging in business, and this is on page 2 at lines 5 to 8, existing law means that you have sold or exchanged at least 12 cars or motor trucks or a combination of cars and motor trucks in the immediately preceding year, or 24 in the 2 immediately preceding years. That's much lower than for like snowmobiles, motorboats, or all-terrain vehicles. And I included this so you can see it here where it's 1 or 2 for either the prior year or the prior 2 years. So an option would be to lower the threshold for the number sold so they would qualify as a dealer, but then they would have to do all of the like obligations of a dealer. So instead what the department is proposing is to change the definition of transporter to say that you will qualify as a transporter if you are a person who sells or exchange new or used motor vehicles, but who are not engaged in business, as that phrase is defined in subdivision, the language we looked at on the prior page. So if you were going to only exchange in the sale of new or used motor vehicles, but it's only going to be like 7 per year, you'd be under that engaged in business threshold of 12. You would fall under the definition of transporter, and then you would be able to transport those vehicles using your transporter plates. And that is dealt with in the second section. So I'm going to talk about the second section and then I'll pause.
Okay, well, I want to go back to
Sure.
and I guess Mike would have been here. We had a lot of discussion about that threshold. And what we had were people getting the benefit of dealer plates, and they were using them for personal use. Their wife had one, and you know, et cetera. So we did look at what would constitute and the volume that would be required. So this is not changing that threshold that we created. It's just a way of dealing with, and we're not giving them temporary, we're not giving them dealer plates to drive around and recreate the problem we had before. I think this was before you were here, but I guess
it was definitely lively discussion.
Yeah, Senator Mazza and I would have been, you know, the old buffaloes on this one. So right. I just want to confirm that that we are not doing anything to undo what we did before.
We are not.
All right, you're on record.
Yes.
Why do we want them to qualify as a transporter?
Because they are.
So this is, so it's a business that registered as a dealership, because when you create your dealership license or whatever, you could say, I anticipate I'm going to sell this number of vehicles, because they thought they were. These vehicles are high-end vehicles that they modify. They're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So unfortunately, they're not selling 12 a year. So what ended up happening is the renewal came up, they didn't sell 12, they don't qualify as a dealer, so their only option was to pull all their dealer plates. Then they're unable to do the R&D and drive the vehicles that they're modifying. So we were looking for a way to find a way for them to have a plate to be able to continue their business, but not meet the 12 threshold.
Is this just for one entity or is this?
There is one entity right now, I assume we will probably find some others.
Because it doesn't matter whether it's used or new vehicles. Yes, Chindan.
So this would allow for somebody that sells less than 12 vehicles a year to get transporter dealer plates as a transporter.
A transporter plate, it's not a dealer plate.
The transporter plate.
It's green, it's a plate, it says transporter versus dealer.
That doesn't cause you concern based on.
No, it's creating a category that reflects kind of this unique in-between group, but it still preserves the definition that we set for dealers and the number of plates that they can have as well. Because obviously some dealerships are very small and some are quite large. And so we were, I think, giving the same to everybody. And so we would have people, entities that would be selling only 3 cars a year and they might have, I don't know, 10 plates or something. So it was a way of correcting that situation. So, but
Do they have to advertise that they're a dealer? Do they have to have certain hours or anything or a location?
I want to say yes, no, and kind of. I know that's not a great answer. It depends
for
on.
a transporter, you mean?
So as a transporter, no. As a dealer, yes. I think we're going to find that they are going to be in a quasi in-between zone, if you will, because they still have to provide their insurance and their place of business and stuff, which is in the next section. So.
You still have to have a place of business. So this doesn't deal with the Carvanas or the people that are just selling vehicles over the internet. So they would be transporters, or in that they're transporting vehicles, but they're not transporters as far as the definition of the statute. So they would just have to use temporary plates to transport those vehicles.
Or in Carvana's situation, they're an out-of-state dealer. They probably have an out-of-state place.
They sometimes come and take your car away in a transport vehicle anyway. Yeah, okay.
Transporter section, so section 2. So the changes here are going to be some just cleanup language, getting rid of gendered language. And at present, in order to be registered as a transporter, you need to present, and I'm at the top of page 5, you need to present proof of compliance with section 800, that's the insurance requirements, and that you either own or lease a permanent place of business located in the state where business will be conducted during regularly established business hours. There's not a minimum number of hours as there are for dealers, and required records are stored and maintained. Instead of needing to present proof of that, this is for all transporters now, not just the, I maybe would have been a dealer if I had a large enough engagement in business, but all transporters would now be self-certifying to the following as opposed to presenting proof of the following.
Are all dealers transporters? So you can be a dealer and
Yes.
not a transporter.
You would be a dealer. Like the dealer plates can be used for more things and there's more.
I think some dealerships would not be transporters, but some might. I mean, I think some might. I think Brinks probably does a lot of subcontracting and moving vehicles around.
Would you ever be like registering with the DMV as a transporter and not a dealer if you were a dealer that was also transporting?
Say that 3 times fast. I would say no.
So it could be that there is overlap in function, but not overlap in treatment under the law and by the DMV due to the practicality of dealers sort of subsuming transporter functions. Did I get that right?
I think so.
So just to get it clear, what about the dealer who wants to be a dealer and they're not meeting that 12 car threshold? They're consistently selling 10, and they still can't be a dealer?
That's a hard one because under the dealer sales part, no. I think they would qualify under this for a transporter plate. But we're still collecting insurance. We're still making sure that they are legitimate.
Just Phil, still selling cars, it doesn't really affect their business.
And what would keep them from still, I'm sorry, I apologize. for stepping
No,
on.
I stepped over your question. No.
So, what would keep them from being a dealer if they were just doing what you said? They're following all the rules, they're trying to sell more vehicles, they're selling 10, they're not violating anything. They're doing everything they're supposed to do as a dealer. Are somebody gonna come knock on their door and say, oh, you didn't meet the threshold?
Well, so as at renewal time for dealers, we do look at the number of sales. There is that 2-year period, right? 12 or 24 over the course of 2 years. So a conversation would happen, much like happened in this case. It's like, look, you're not qualified. What are you gonna do? The commissioner has the ability to kind of waive that, especially during COVID. We kind of gave some waivers on that because people are out.
So what's the impact on their business? They still can sell cars. The only thing that they wouldn't be able to do is get dealer plates.
Correct.
Or is there anything else that they
Well,
don't get?
the dealer plate allows you to use in your test drive your car. The transporter plate, no, the transporter is for them, but then transporting. the car.
So just like they have insurance issues for having people test drive vehicles.
This plate would not allow them to use it for test drive.
That's what I'm saying. That's the only impact on their business of trying to sell cars, of not being an official dealer, is they can't use dealer.
We also don't want the person to run around with a $100,000 car without paying sales tax on it either.
Correct.
Let's see how they say.
Correct.
It's just a dealer.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, all surface vehicles.
All surface vehicles, this one's really simple. So currently, all surface vehicles can only have 6 or 8 tires. This is on page 6, lines 2 and 3. Turns out, some all surface vehicles have 4 wheels,
It shouldn't be surprising.
making it so that they can have 4 to 8 tires.
I don't see the change.
Page 6, lines 2 and 3. You'll see 6 or is crossed out and replaced with 4 to. So it's now a range of 4 to 8 tires as opposed to 6 or 8 tires.
Shall be designed for both land and in water.
So why did this come up?
Because of this. Because they're $35,000 and they're really, really cool and I love them. But it is an ATV that you drive in the water and the wheels fold underneath it and it becomes a jet ski. How, right? I mean,
So why do you need a definition? That's the question.
well, because they go on land and water, they fall under the definition of all service vehicles. And years and years and years ago, I believe it originated at this committee, that all service vehicles were coming, but they had 6 or 8 wheels. So statute was created to allow them to be registered. They pay an ATV fee and a boat.
So all we're doing is changing 6 to 4 here.
Yes.
Yes.
So, because otherwise these can't be registered,
Oh,
right?
There's no definition of dimension. Why don't we just call them all ATVs?
I don't know the answer to that.
is
Well,
there a different fee?
well, in this case, you're paying a motorboat fee and an ATV fee.
Maybe that's it.
And they're, under the ATVs, you've got quite a definition of ATVs for width and weight.
Right.
I don't know how welding all that together.
You probably could have some sort of combined definition. I will say from a drafting perspective, it is much easier for me to straight out.
So if I invent a motorcycle that can also be a boat, we'd have to change the statute to say 2 to 8 tires.
That's no question.
Yes.
Why don't we just say
I'm
up
gonna
to
work
8
on that.
tires?
Why don't we just say, yeah, it doesn't matter how many tires they have?
Up to 8 tires.
I don't know why you couldn't, that's,
That seems like a very elegant way.
I mean, we even have designed to be inflated 10 pounds per square inch. My goodness, that's very,
Why don't we just say they're, yeah.
and we also have the.
Designed to be
weight.
inflated, doesn't matter what their pound is.
I don't,
Okay, welcome, Commissioner.
I don't know if that would end up altering the definition of ATVs. I haven't looked into that.
This seems to be the simplest thing.
I want to see the picture.
So I will keep this in, but I will change the 6 or 8 tires. It shall instead be up to 8 tires.
So it could be one, it could be a
A
unicycle.
unicycle also is
I'm
good.
gonna invent the unicycle.
Oh, this is riveting.
That would be a good use of committee time to go drive one of those.
I still haven't been to Middlebury to see the tunnel.
Likewise.
Thank goodness.
And we haven't done a committee meeting on a train either. That's another one of our goals.
How much do these cost
They're about $35,000.
for people just to recreate? 35,000? Well, I suppose Senator Ingalls will have one. on-
No, no.
You can tow it behind your other boat.
Yeah, well, I'd have to lift it on.
Okay.
Here, you
No,
wanted
you
to,
can get back to the.
oh, you have looked at it?
I did.
Oh, yeah. He drooled all over it.
I don't see Senator Pursley buying one of those. I don't know why. Probably
They make electric version.
Stereotyping me as an
I am.
anti-all-surface vehicle person.
I see you more in a canoe, to be honest. All right.
Okay, section 4.
Okay, so sections 4 to 9 all go together. They deal with record keeping as it relates to records for certificates of title. You'll remember when the DMV was in here last year and they were talking about their modernization project and how the first phase dealt with things like certificates of title, and you made the changes with exempt vehicle title, which we're going to get to later. And we addressed a little bit of the outdated language related to certificates of title, which in one place said that they actually needed to be like stored across the street at the DMV's main place of business. Well, there are other places in statute that have outdated language, and the DMV approach, and I talked to them about this, and this is sort of a deviation from what they originally suggested, was to include in statute in that early chapter about Department of Motor Vehicles operations to specify what sort of records need to be preserved for certificates of title. And in the next phase of their modernization project, if there is a different record keeping requirement for, driver's licenses or something like that, it could be added to this section. But specifying that for purposes of certificates of title, the original certificate of title records, which would include the iterations of that, surrendered certificates of title and requests for salvage title, needs to be maintained as an electronic image or electronic copy, or just another form of an image, as opposed to other places in statute, which we're going to see where it says like it may be maintained on microfilm, which is sort of like outdated technology. Just saying it needs to be maintained as an electronic image that allows the tracing of the motor vehicle, vessel, snowmobile, etc., for a period of 5 years. So that's what the original record maintenance requirement would be. And then for purposes of more of like a database record, it needs to be maintained indefinitely in any electronic format that's determined by the commissioner, which would allow flexibility for advancement if there are future technology changes to what they want their storage mechanism to be, that allows for the tracing of motor vehicle, vessel, etc. So original records need to be maintained in a way that allows for tracing for 5 years, but it can be an electronic maintenance, so it could be a picture, and the indefinite maintenance needs to be in any electronic format as determined by the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles that allows for tracing. So in both instances, there's the tracing piece.
We don't have these requirements in place now.
We do, but they're scattered about, and these are the changes you'll see in sections 5, 6, 7, 8,
So
9.
what you're doing is consolidating all the different
Yes.
pieces into this.
And then referencing them, just saying, the commissioner shall maintain a record of all certificates of title, et cetera, pursuant to section 117 of this title. And that's the change that you see in sections 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So then if in the future you wanted to change the record keeping requirement, you only need to change it in one place as opposed to changing it everywhere.
So I hate to bring this up, so we list all the different vehicles that are registered.
But you don't have ASVs? I thought someone was gonna ask me that after
Yeah.
the prior section.
ASV.
All surface vehicles?
Service vehicle. And then is there another way of doing this, or do we always have to list all the vehicle? Is there a way to say tracing of all vehicles that need registration or something, or we have to list each thing that gets electronic?
So why don't we have ASVs in here? Or should we?
So, I mean, I need to go back and look at the definitions of these things to see if the ASV would be under all-terrain vehicle. You do issue certificates of title for them, right? So, well, we got vessel there.
The vessel.
So this would be smaller than, so it wouldn't qualify for a boat title because it could be over 16 feet.
Yeah.
So it would qualify for an ATV title.
It would.
So it would be
meets-
covered.
So it meets the definition of ATV for title, but not for Not for registration, so what we did in the last session where we had that gets an ATV title?
Yes.
Okay, so why do we need a definition of ASD?
Because it's also a boat, so it goes under the water, I guess.
So what's-
I guess one could read jargon, all terrain, waters are terrain, isn't it?
No.
Terrain,
And you don't, but you need a registration for all boats,
So why,
all motorized boats.
Why don't we just-
Yes.
we treat waterways differently with rights and stuff, right?
well, the public waters.
I mean,
So it's a way of saying that they could just they couldn't get a title, but they could get a registration as a vessel for all surface
So
vehicles.
why don't we just add them?
To this,
So
Yes.
I think for purposes of
I
the
guess that's my
certificate of
question.
title, it sounds like it might not be necessary,
Right.
but adding it, I do not think would be a problem. However, to get at your first question, which was, do we need to list them all out? I'm sure we could come up with a substitute for listing them all out. So sort of any, maybe we would use vehicle that the Department of Motor Vehicles issues a certificate of title for.
Because I'm sure somebody's gonna come up
I don't know if
with,
it's shorter, but what it does is it makes it so that if like there is the unicycle all-surface
Right.
vehicle in the future, then,
Or
and
you
the-
there's
don't
a
have to come
certificate of
back to
title.
the
or
statute.
the hoverboard that we're gonna
Yeah.
start registering.
So,
Or if your e-scooters start getting registered, it would
Yeah.
be, or start getting a
Yeah.
certificate of title.
Senator Ingalls has a question.
But, is there a difference in somebody selling a all-terrain vehicle, like a private person selling an all-terrain vehicle, and the person buying it doesn't have to pay tax on it when they register it, versus when a dealer sells it?
So
Why do we do that?
So ATVs are subject to sales tax, not purchase and use tax, so it's a tax department tax. In the tax department, anything that is constituted as a casual sale is not subject to sales tax. So you selling me your ATV, that is a casual sale. If I buy it from a business regularly engaged in selling ATVs, that's sales tax.
It's only cars that have to,
What if they register it?
so that's when they would get to pay the purchase and use is when they go to register.
Purchase and use would never be paid because it's not on the road, right? It's not-
No, I'm talking about the cars,
So cars, yes, when you register, you would pay your tax.
but all the other vehicles, it's not just ATVs, it could be SUVs
ATVs and snowmobiles are the two that are subject to sales tax purchase versus.
and all surface vehicles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
and those revenues go into the ed fund
That's tax.
and sales tax.
So nothing, so if they register it, it still doesn't have any bearing on it? I mean, if they're running it on trails and roads and all of that, they're still not paying a tax of any sort on a private sale?
Correct.
Seems like a disadvantage to a dealer.
Sales tax is more than purchase and use tax, is it not? No?
It's where it goes that's different. So purchasing use tax goes to the transportation fund with a third going to the ed fund. Sales tax goes to the ed
It's
fund.
the same thing with a different name.
6%.
Except for the cannabis sales tax.
All right.
Well, the cannabis excise tax.
Right.
The sales tax is the same.
No, it's not. We've created a special fund because we've got non-LEA providers of after-school programs.
Yes, you're talking about where it goes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Senator Chin.
I'm gonna get myself in trouble with my friend Senator Ingalls here, because I'm not afraid of talking about fees and taxes, but does Vermont have any type of luxury tax on toys such as these, all like an excess fee? Did other states have luxury taxes on toys like these all surface vehicles?
I actually don't have a problem of changing that to run a casual sale to be in compliant with what the dealers have to do. I think it's a loophole that is, not fair to dealers. I just feel that.
Usually they're used vehicles, but I guess what you're saying, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, then the private sale, they would have to submit.
Yeah, like a automobile, they have to get either a value or the
But
book
if I wanted to sell you
value.
my chainsaw,
But it's not a chainsaw, it's not using roads or trails or
maybe.
registration.
Maybe.
What kind of chainsaw you got?
And
You
you're.
could make
and
a
you're-
joke out of it. Huh?
Yeah, I get that, yeah.
I think the difficulty is the tax structure. and how they're being
But
treated.
you could
And
basically-
the way our education spending and fund looks like and what the tax rate is increased, I don't think anybody would want to redirect anything at this point.
Well, no, but I think what Senator Ingles is saying is add a purchase and use to ATV sales. So
Yeah.
when you go to register it, you also pay a purchase and use tax like you do with vehicles.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
To get the aftermarket.
So we have to write this down, that Ingles proposed a new.
So, and just like you do with,
I just want to be consistent.
well, my brother gave Nathaniel a trailer. And well, I had to get even though I had to pay a tax on the value, even though it was a
We do
gift.
purchase and use on trailers.
I
Not on
did.
ATVs.
Right. So maybe you can do it at the point they want to register you.
Yeah, I think that's
Some
what they
ATVs
want
are
to.
pretty pricey.
Yeah, they are.
I was looking at them, they're 18 to 50,000.
Some of the
50,000.
side by side of the, yeah, they're.
Interestingly, when they built the building, when I started working for DMV, sales tax or purchase and use tax was charged to ATVs. And then shortly after I started working, and I don't remember the reason why, it was switched, so they paid sales tax instead. I don't know what.
That's probably back when the transportation fund was flush.
It was many years ago, that's for sure.
And it's probably at the same time we were underfunding pensions.
So the only thing that we would collect it on would be the private sales, because we're already collecting it on the sales tax.
But it also would just be where
Where it
it
goes.
went, yeah.
So the purchaser would pay it only if they registered.
If they register it.
And if they don't register it, then,
I mean, that's the catch point, right?
Yeah.
That's the catch point. If you want to register it, and you want to run on our roads and trails, then you would pay a tax.
ATVs cannot be used on the roads.
Yeah, they can
In
be.
some places.
They're on all town roads, not all town roads,
No,
but
only
in my
in the
area.
town.
In my area, they go right through Newport City.
If the town approves.
Yeah.
Right.
The town.
And then I don't think we have a town up there, other than a couple, that don't allow them to be used on all town roads.
Really?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
is this a growth area? Are we seeing like a widespread increase in ATVs and ASVs and all this stuff?
I will answer that.
I don't know.
In
ATVs.
our area, yes. In fact, as the city of Newport did, is that, and I didn't think it would ever go through, but they recognized the growth area of it. I mean, you go to New Hampshire along the border right there, and
Oh,
you'll
Route
see,
3.
you just see it. But Newport actually said they just wanted to get into this city. And Newport said, no, we're gonna do even better than that. We're going to give more opportunity to the businesses in this loop. And they allow them to come into the city and they have this loop. I mean, it's a couple miles. And like I said,
But it's designated.
it's designated, but the town roads on most of my towns up there are not designated. On a town road, you can run an ATV.
A lot of towns tried it, our town did, and then changed it because, well, they're having.
It's been a good revenue source for us. It's made a difference.
Just a large group.
Yeah, going through when people are on the back roads and, you have like, large groups.
Tours.
And we have some businesses that are like, what can we do to get them here? Of course, they're, the state highways, which they do allow them on certain very special instances. I can point out where they are, but we have some towns, oh, you know what, we just need to get them here. Well, we can't get them there. It's just not the way that it is, but.
What's the cost to register motorhome?
Motorhome is considered a pleasure car rate, so I believe the new fee's 92, so $92 a year.
There
Yeah,
was
I often wondered about that, how they were determined. It seemed to me it was an awful low fee for a motorhome. But so you're saying it's the same price as an automobile?
Correct, yes.
And is that, but it's not based on.
Why wouldn't they be a little bit more than an automobile?
I do not know the answer to that. I believe that you could make it more.
It seemed like that was one vehicle type that we had not increased the registration for about
Right.
years. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
did.
Is it defined? Recreational vehicle?
Recreational vehicle, I don't think that recreational, are we talking about like motorhomes now, or are we talking about recreational vehicles?
Well,
And what are you covering in
Yeah,
recreational?
yeah, I'm
Let me
talking
start,
about motorhome.
okay, recreational vehicle, I do not think is defined, but, cause it's done by like trailer and things like that, that is, the definitions, but.
But if you have a 20-foot, I don't know what do you call those if you don't call them RVs, but
I think they're called
Campers.
something different in Title 23. Do you know,
Campers.
Mike? Okay, I think we're both looking at the same
Yes.
time.
I'm just doing it.
That always amazed me to think that those motorhomes are registered the same price as an automobile.
isn't there a weight difference? Like when you get over a certain weight number, you gotta
Because
get-
they're not categorized as a truck, weight doesn't come into it.
Okay,
Doesn't the weight of the vehicle where our roads
Yeah.
anymore, so we should.
we should be on weight, I think.
I don't know how much they weigh relative to.
They can't be less.
Than a car, no. But there's great variation in a car. I
Some,
Yeah.
mean, your EV weighs a lot more than my Honda, so you should be paying more.
I'm
You're paying nothing to get
I
this
know,
about it.
I know, I'm willing to pay more.
Yeah,
We should fix that.
It's defined as a trailer coach. Trailer coach means any trailer or semi-trailer designed to be towed by a motor vehicle and designed, equipped, or used for sleeping, eating, or
But
living
what if
quarters.
it's not towed? There's a lot of, you just,
I see what you're saying. If it's one that you like drive itself.
yeah. Or a bus. So if I bought a motor coach, but then lived in it and drove it around, I would just pay the registration of a normal vehicle.
Right.
Even though it could be
used
250.
Greyhound, you could
I
buy,
could buy used Greyhound, live in it, register. Like that.
you could have a mobile home.
Yep.
Would be a mobile home, but it's actually mobile.
Yeah,
And because it's for pleasure use, you can drive it without a special license too.
which would be
Right.
dangerous.
Well, not if I drive it. I'm a good driver.
Not pushing commerce.
A lot of people, you'd be surprised, hop in and drive, one of these very large, and oftentimes they're towing a vehicle in the back. So the length is as much as what, a tractor trailer, maybe more?
Could be. Can't even go through the notch.
Well, at least you could unhook the
I
car.
hope you're, give it a shot.
Oh, this is,
Okay, well, I think that is an interesting,
so should we make it subject to, tax at time of registration?
I think we ought to.
well, I think and I don't know what DMV, I think we talked about this maybe my first year of the committee about weights, about changing registration by weights. And if I remember correctly, one of DMV's comments back was, well, you don't have the data on all vehicle weights. So if we just said it was by weight, it's kind of self-reporting as we do with some of the heavy trucks, like what's the max load or what's the fully loaded weight of this truck, and they just write it down, right? We don't know what it is, because you don't have, it's not like miles per gallon or something that's, you could get from the feds.
I do not believe so, but I haven't looked, so I don't know.
Right. Well, could you look, is there data on weights on vehicles?
I can ask the question.
Because we have value. But then that gets into that question of like, do you do it like other states where they do registration based on the value?
Mhm,
Ad valorem.
mhm.
Yes, we could use some Latin. Which Ledge Council always does.
And we did boom on last year,
I know.
so I mean, oh my goodness, there's tremendous opportunity here.
What I will do is I will look into the timing around the switch for the ATVs for the sales and use tax to see, like, because it seems like there was precedent. It used to be for the purchase and use tax, obviously then a policy decision because you were making it so that when it is a like taxable transaction, they would have to pay the purchase and use tax, but also drawing money away from the ed fund because it would be 40%, or sorry, I can't do math. It would be 60% basically that's then going to the transportation fund as opposed
Right.
to.
Yeah,
The
whatever.
transportation, what's under more pressure, the transportation fund or the education? Like a fight amongst the losing funds?
Well, it just means that I can't imagine it's a huge amount of money.
I bet it's more than you think it is.
Well-
Those things are expensive.
That's a fairness thing.
And,
I mean,
well, and
yeah.
talking about used, we're
Right.
talking about used market here. But, yeah, I'm sure they are, but, the volume, I don't, We don't know.
Right, well, maybe,
Maybe
yeah,
there's some way
the
of,
numbers will flush out.
but basically, if we make it subject to the purchase and use tax, then it would be split, 1/3, 2/3.
We're gonna call it the Chittenden rule, okay?
No,
No, I think
that's all vehicles.
Okay, so you'll get back to us on that?
Yes.
Yeah, so that takes us to section
Would you
7.
be able to get that from the tax department?
What?
The number of, you probably couldn't, could you?
No, because they're private sales.
Not from the private sale.
No, not from,
We collect the sales tax. So, and then remit it to the tax
you
department.
do, okay.
So. in
Well, give us an
taxable
idea of what the
situations-
universe of sales,
Yeah, that's my list.
Okay.
Okay, so 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all then gonna be those references where it's saying the commissioner needs to keep these certificate of titles pursuant to section 117 of this title. And why is it so many places? Because there are different sections that deal with like titling for vessels. There's the salvage title piece. That's why it's not one change, one place. This is your certificate of title statute. But everything will then reference back to section 117. Okay, that's gonna take you to section 10. So under current law, residents, which is defined in 23 VSA section 4, are required to register their vehicles in Vermont, and they have sort of a grace period to do it. They have 60 days after they move. In the definition of residents in 23 VSA section 4, it excludes what I'm going to call temporary residents. So people who might be here for an extended period because of their job, things like that. So they are not required to register in Vermont, and there's maybe some ambiguity as to whether or not they can register their vehicle in Vermont. So the changes that are made in section 10 are to say, as is current law, but making it its own new subsection, residents were required to register their vehicles in Vermont. Subsection B, temporary residents may register their vehicles owned in Vermont. Subsection B, and this is something that I emailed Mike about at 9:14 last night, and he apologized that he didn't get back to me until 9:15 a.m. this morning, and I told him responding within 12 hours and a minute was pretty good when he should have been sleeping for some of that time. But we think that the subsection B, temporary residents, should also be amended to add reference to businesses in Vermont being able to register their vehicles if they're registered in Vermont. That's current law. It was just something that was sort of missed when I was taking the definition of resident from 23 VSA section 4, which
so
takes
you're gonna
me.
modify B?
Yeah.
I think that would create some revenue with a lot of the people that have second homes here.
Because why do you think they would want
Well, there's
to?
trustees
I have
out
a friend of mine
there,
that does, I don't know how he does it now, but he has the largest home on Lake Memphremagog, and he's got 1 or 2 vehicles registered in the state of Vermont, he's not a resident here.
And I guess the advantage to them is then they get Vermont plates
Yeah,
for those vehicles, and they just keep a vehicle.
yeah, and he keeps a vehicle.
And they
here.
can do it now, this just makes it explicit.
So it might help if we looked at the definition of resident and temporary resident. So resident would be an individual living in the state who intends to make the state the individual's place of domicile, either permanently or for an indefinite number of years. So not really those second home people. Temporary resident means an individual living in the state for a particular purpose involving a defined period, including students, migrant workers employed in seasonal occupations, and individuals employed under a contract with a fixed term, provided that the motor vehicle will be used in the state on a regular basis. So you couldn't be, using it exclusively in New Hampshire,
Right.
for example.
You got somebody that flies into Burlington, gets a Uber or whatever, has a neighbor pick them up, and they have the vehicle at their home, or vehicles at their home.
There wouldn't be any reason why we wouldn't. This is just clarifying.
And we're doing it now.
I don't think,
So, so this kind of plays into a whole larger issue, right? So, currently, the statute is silent about non-residents. Statute says residents must register. Doesn't say anything about non-residents.
Which is defined in 23 VSA section.
So what we experienced over the last few years is a large surge of non-residents coming here registering vehicles that weren't allowed to be registered in their home state. And by getting the registration in the state of Vermont, they were then able to go back to their home state and say,
Oh, well, like, what kind of
salvage, non-repairable, lots of junk vehicles. We had a large influx of them in the southern end of the state, very abusive to our
Look at the
staff.
Dummerston DMV.
Dummerston, Bennington, Springfield, and some in Rutland. I got to the point where we hired sheriffs to be in the offices because of the abuse of these customers that were coming in. They were basically saying, I've got a second job, I'm making $200-300 for each transaction that I bring in here. Vehicles were never touching ground in the state of Vermont. They were getting inspected. They were getting registrations. Some of them had figured out that you could get a registration that would then allow you to get registered in the other state, and they'd mail plates back and ask for a refund.
Maybe we're gonna say something like they have to have a domicile in the
So
state.
this is what this is.
Right, so this is what we're kind of addressing in the statute. We have procedurally, internally, through, the statute allows the commissioner to require additional documentation if she deems necessary. So we created a form that if you are a non-resident with no ties to Vermont, just take this form to your home state, have somebody at the DMV sign it, saying that it's okay to register in Vermont, and we'd be happy to register for you. We have yet to have it signed. Well, we've had many signed, we have yet to have any actually signed by.
So that's the next section, which talks about what the commissioner needs to do in terms of registering. So the commissioner shall register a motor vehicle that is required or permitted to be registered in Vermont. So it would be referencing back to if you're required to register it because you're a resident, if you're permitted to register it because you are a temporary resident, then the commissioner needs to register the motor vehicle, provided that you fill out the form and it meets the commissioner's requirements.
And what was this thing about businesses that you were gonna have?
So under the current definition of resident in 23 VSA section 4, subdivision 30, resident, as used in this title only, means any person living in the state who intends to make the state his or her principal place of domicile, either permanently or for indefinite number of years. That all sounds familiar. That's what was included in the definition of resident for purposes of the language that I showed you in the bill. But this second sentence, any foreign partnership, firm, association, or corporation having a place of business in this state shall be deemed to be a resident as to all vehicles owned or leased and that are garaged or maintained in the state. By not using the definition of resident from 23 VSA section 4 and instead using this new definition of resident, you're missing out on those vehicles that are owned by the business.
What if you said person instead of individual in this?
Why don't you just use that language here? then?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to stick it in the may annually register, unless you want to say they're required to register. You want to say that they're required to
No, the
register?
temporary people?
No, so
No.
the vehicles that are owned by the business that's here, do you want to say they're required to register them here? Or do you want to say that they may register them here?
What's an example of a?
So we had an individual that, basically, so I talked about this new procedure, having a form signed by your home state, and an individual who worked for, I believe, Keurig. Keurig is a company outside of Vermont, and he was stationed here, so he didn't have a Vermont license. He lived here during the week, drove the vehicle that was registered here in Vermont. Of course, we kicked it back saying, no, you have to get signed by your home state. So, and again, when you're changing policies and practices, sometimes you can't cover all scenarios. So again, this was a scenario that, okay, we need to address that.
So this, they would just have to get something signed by the employer?
Correct. We have an affidavit that says that they work in the state of Vermont, process the registration, collect tax, and move on.
And on this definition in the statute, Cynthia, doesn't that, when you use person, doesn't that include the businesses?
Yes, it would, but the way that the definition of resident, it talks about a person, so this shouldn't be person because a business,
Should
like
be individual.
individual, but like, does a business live somewhere? It's more like the business is registered to like do business and has its place of business here. So I think it's a little weird to say person, I mean individual and business, the person lives in Vermont.
Rental cars are a great example. Enterprise, they're not a Vermont business, but they got a lot of vehicles in Vermont that register and collect the rental tax, stuff like that. But again, theoretically, they're not technically a resident of Vermont, they're not from here, but they're here.
I've never rented a car with Vermont plates.
That does happen very infrequently. We actually register quite a few vehicles.
Where do they go? I can never.
Well, it's interesting.
All over the country.
Exactly, because as soon as you rent it, and that was kind of one of the issues that we ran into, I'll just diverge for a second, was getting the permanent registrations to them, because unless we issue it the same day, you'll never catch that car, right? Because you never know where it's gonna end up, so.
So we made other changes to titling that took effect in January.
Yes.
That's helped address this issue. This further helps the issue of abuse of our title system.
So what we're gonna do is add, and on top of page 9, sort of the same
Yep.
language that exists somewhere else. If we would-
The Foreign Partnership Firm
address-
Association having a place of business in the state, they may register.
Could it be said that this is in a way to, in light of our new corrections that went recently into effect, it's to help those that do have out of staters that snowbird here. If they live in Florida, and with the new rules, do they have to like take their car back to Florida to get inspected, which also has an inspection thing? And this would allow them to not have to do that. They can register them up here without being a Vermont resident and not have to bring it back to their home state to get it inspected.
That is definitely an outcome. I think most people who leave a car in Vermont usually have it registered here for that exact reason, so you don't have to go back to the other state to have it inspected.
It's allowing people out of staters, snowbirders to still register.
That was one of our real concerns, is making sure that we don't leave that out, right? Because it's an issue.
Well, it's more revenue. It's more revenue for us, and people, the best revenue that you've ever had is for people that wanna pay the revenue. I mean, you needed to me to do that, so therefore I'm gonna pay you. There we go.
To drive their vacation car all the way back to the state.
Yeah.
Every year.
Yeah.
We'll just take the money.
And they probably like having Vermont plates. As everybody.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah.
It used to be Hickville, but now it's back in the 50s. All
So that
right.
takes section 12.
Yes, section 12.
Second hint.
Dealing with weight limitations on low number plates. So currently, if you're going to have registration number 101 through 9,999,
And that's registration number, sales plate.
yes, I mean, that's same registration number, it means license plate number. So those need to be registered at the pleasure car rate. A lot of places in statute, like when you're dealing with the license plates for the like Right Futures license plate or the conservation plates, that will use the language that says for less than 26,001 pounds. What's happening here is, I'm gonna get my car wrong maybe, but the Tundra is more than the pleasure car rate. So you couldn't, under our laws, have a low number plate on a Toyota Tundra.
The Thunder's over 26,000 pounds.
No, it's under 26,001 pounds, but it's over what would be eligible under the pleasure car rate because it meets the lower end of the motor truck.
What's that?
So the pleasure car rate is 6,099 pounds. So any truck that you have that has to weight up to 6,099 pounds, the pleasure car rate. The Toyota Tundras, I own one, their gross vehicle weight is 9,999. So
Well, what,
if you register it
26.
that,
It's up to 26,001 pounds. So it could be heavier than the Tundra, but the Tundra's the example of something that's above the pleasure car rate, but lower than the 26,001 pound.
And we do have weights for trucks, but not pleasure cars.
correct.
Doesn't seem
But the
like-
Tundra, say, it just seems, isn't that a big spread between what a Tundra weighs and 26,000?
Yes, but you also, some people have like an F-250 that they drive around, they might know it from home. I had a friend that tows a trailer with a tractor on it, so it was great, so he had to register 12,000 pounds. All of a sudden, he can't have his own plate because it doesn't fit into this.
But to be very clear, this isn't changing anything about how much it costs to register the vehicle. All it is saying is, can that vehicle have a plate with number 107?
I'm just thinking the 26,000 seems like a high limit relative to what we're
Do you
experiencing for
care
actual.
what?
No, I guess I don't care. Elizabeth does not weigh.
What number does she
363?
have? Mike, you don't have all license plate numbers? Remember?
It's a joke, Mike.
I
Disappointment.
transferred the low number to,
One of your other old cars?
yeah, I still have a 1992 Maxima in the garage. that I haven't driven in a long time.
This makes it consistent with the other stuff.
But my son is thinking he needs a new car and I could drive I could replace mine, he'd get the new one and then I could drive.
That's not how it's
the
supposed to work.
car.
You're supposed to get the new one and your son's supposed to get the new one. But, so has anybody ever proposed that the low numbers have a higher registration fee? Because everybody wants it, so maybe they'd pay for it.
Not that I am aware of.
Well, then all the executive branches.
Well, that's only under 101. They don't pay for those plates, I assume.
Oh, no, they do,
Well, they-
but they're just
It's a
the
regular-
standard.
Right.
registration fee.
So you don't pay for your license plate unless you're getting a
Registration.
special license plate. You pay for your registration and like the license plate comes with.
Okay.
But they've become, number plates have become just amazing. How much emphasis people put on
I
license.
heard yesterday from a long-serving member, decades, that in the old days, the administration to get votes would promise low-numbered plates.
Oh, really?
Vote for this and you might get a 3-number plate. Those days are gone, I've been told.
Well, also, that, yeah, now they're just controlled by the governor's office.
The 3 digits, yes.
Yeah,
You have to get it,
that's who was offering them for votes supposedly decades ago.
really.
So I was told.
Pat Rice used to give them out without the governor. You remember Pat?
I thought it was only the 999, but it's the 9,000.
Is the low number.
So the low number goes up to 4 digits. Okay, enough about that.
Okay, totally switching topics. Section 13, if you register your vehicle, statute talks about how much money you can get as a refund if you cancel the registration. So under existing statute, it only addresses 1 and 2 year registrations, but there are some trailers that can be registered for 5 years, and statute is silent on the proration for a canceled registration for that 5-year registration. Under existing law, if you cancel the registration prior to the beginning of the registration period, the refund is the full amount less $5.
So it's canceled, what we're deleting and replacing.
If we've just been spelling canceled in the British way, not the American way, it only has 1 L in the
I
United
always
States.
spell it with 2, and it
Yeah,
drives me crazy.
Cancellation has 2, but canceled is only supposed to have 1.
Well, the Brits use both.
The Brits use 2 L's in canceled.
Well, I'm gonna write the Queen a letter.
That she's spelling it wrong.
It drives me crazy. I always would use 2. Huh? What?
You can write the queen all you want, you're not gonna get a response. It's gonna be the king.
Well, I could write Queen Camilla. I'm sure she'd return my letter. Oh, all right, so we see it all the time in airports. And some have double L and some don't. So we've been using double L and now we're using 1. It's sort of like, where do you put the parentheses before or after the period?
Yeah.
We had a big debate about that.
Yeah.
What?
I'm a big before guy.
Before the
It's
period.
more the thing with
It's
quotation
always
marks, because that
after.
differs with the type
I
of
do,
punctuation.
particularly if you're using a quote around a term.
I'm
Or,
a 2-spacer too. These young kids
Oh,
today, you
yeah.
have 1 space after a period, crazy.
Statute is 2 spaces.
We're gonna change that. Okay,
So if it's canceled within 30 days, the refund is still the full amount, less $5, but you need to prove to the commissioner's satisfaction that the number plate hasn't been used. And then we're getting to the proration pieces. So if it's canceled prior to the beginning of the 2nd year of a 2-year registration period, you get half the full amount, less $5. And then in new subdivision 4, and why is there so much language here? It's because the proration is based on the portion of the 5-year registration that's been used. So 4/5, if you get 4/5 less $5 if it's before the 2nd year, 3/5 less the $5 if it's before the 3rd year, 2/5 for the 4th year, etc. So this is just a proration for a 5-year registration.
Not a lot, and it came up and one was denied because it's not there, for instance, statute. Historically, the staff would just say, okay, it's 5 years divided by 5, you haven't been doing it these years, basically what she was doing here. Excuse me, but because we had one rejected, that's what the claim came back to the hearings, so it felt appropriate to address that statute.
What did they want, full refund?
No, he just wanted the year that he hadn't got into, but because the statute only spoke to 1 and 2 year registrations and he had 5, well, he said it's not the statute,
It's only trailers that do 5.
correct. So this will not be used a lot, but it is one of the ones that.
Oh, God.
So in this section, when we talk about may cancel the registration of a motor vehicle, snowmobile, motorboat, so can you not cancel the registration of a all-surface vehicle or a vessel? Or an ATV or a vessel?
I would apply this to that, absolutely.
And so we use motorboat, but I thought we switched all motorboats to vessels.
Vessels, we.
But you don't have to register a vessel. Motorboats
No.
are vessels, but not all vessels are motorboats. You don't need to register every vessel. You do need to register every
Because
motorboat.
motorboat is defined as over 16 feet.
Motorboat has a motor.
Also motorboats and vessels.
But if you were to have a outboard motor on your kayak, then that would make it a motorboat and it would need to be registered because it needs to get a number under federal
Regardless of
regulations.
the length. So it's 16 feet or if it has a motor.
So we were talking about titling. So
Oh, yeah,
titling
yeah,
boats
yeah.
has to be longer than 16 feet.
Okay, that's where I
If
was
you have motor, you're gonna have to register. Titling would come based on.
Right, so registration is just based on the motor. But this just listing the vehicles is just another reason to come up with another way of
Sort of
saying.
all-inclusive definition.
I don't wanna split hairs. I was just gonna ask out of curiosity. What about electric trolling motors? That count as a motor?
It does.
It does.
Okay.
I
So
think there's an exemption for canoe that has less than
I have one of those.
horsepower or something like that.
no, like I think trolling motors, you're gonna need to have it be numbered because federal regulations require numbering of things with motors unless there's a new
But that's for
exemption.
the motor.
Your 50-foot yacht, Ingles, you gotta register it.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna register in Canada. It's cheaper.
But like if you're someone who uses their kayak to go fishing and you wanna like get way out and you put a little electric trolling motor on it, I think that would make it so that you would need to have a number on it for
Yeah,
purposes of federal regulations.
Wakeboards with motors technically qualify, but it's flat. So where do you put the stickers? And yes, that has come up, and we told them to put it on the top of it, understanding, so.
I'm sure the US Coast Guard has been asked like where to put numbers so that it's visible.
And can you cancel the registration of an ATV?
I would say that an ATV is gonna fall under the definition of motor vehicle because it's propelled by motor. So I think there are a lot of instances where we're listing things out where motor vehicle would be
Okay,
covering some of the things that are listed after motor vehicle.
okay,
Yeah, well, you're welcome.
okay, I don't see a problem with that. Any other questions about proration, canceled trailer registration? Section 14.
Section 14. Nothing is changing about what signal lamps
Well,
and
don't be so sure of
sirens
that.
can go on in this language. Nothing is changing about what vehicles can have signal lamps and sirens. What is changing is whether or not the DMV needs to issue a permit. And it is saying that permits no longer need to be issued for motor vehicles, law enforcement that are owned by like the government, basically. So if it's a state or municipal law enforcement vehicle that could have the blue and white signal lamps, it can continue to have the blue and white signal lamps. It just doesn't need to go through the process of applying for the permit. Nothing is changing.
What's the permit?
They currently, like, so if, you know, a sheriff's vehicle that says like Wyndham County Sheriff on the side of it, they need to issue a permit for it to have the blue lights and
So
everything.
right now, if you want to run blue lights, you have to have a permit regardless.
Right now, if you want to run anything other than an amber light, you need to have a permit.
Yeah.
So this is saying you don't need the permit for the law enforcement vehicles. You would still need the permit for the like emergency services vehicles.
Right, and what would they be running? Because they can't run blue light.
They can run one single blue light, but they can run the red and white lights.
And the blue light has to be rear faced.
Yes,
But they don't, but they would still need the permit?
they would still need the permit.
emergency vehicles. So who doesn't have to get the permit?
Law enforcement. And
Just law enforcement.
just law enforcement, and constables would continue to be sort of treated differently. So what you would have is in section 15, subdivision or subsection A is going to deal with the ones that don't need permits, and those are going to be the government law enforcement vehicles.
That would include sheriffs.
That would include sheriffs. And then they can get the sirens, blue signal lamps, or blue and white signal lamps. They can also get the red signal lamp or amber signal lamp or combination, and those are the ones that on law enforcement vehicles, they need to be mounted so as to be primarily visible from the rear of the vehicle. You'll remember that was like a point of
Only
discussion.
when parked.
No, they can be run all the time.
We also added a blue light on the fire truck, didn't we? One blue light, didn't we? They
Yes.
argued for it for years.
I thought we said they had to be parked.
Let's check.
When they turn on the blue light.
Yeah, that's what it was. Okay, I remember that because remember they were after us for years about a blue light.
You know, one blue light can be mounted on like a fire truck.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to only be run when it's stopped. Oh, and I think that was because you were told that the wiring would be the same, so you couldn't have the blue light only be engaged when
When they
parked,
turn on
but
the
the
lights,
rest of them,
yeah.
because you turn on lights.
You can, it just costs extra money to run that.
Yeah, they pushed for that for years. Yeah.
So that's going to deal with, so subsection A are your law enforcement government-owned vehicles. Subdivisions 1A and 1B are the two different types of lights that you could have there. Subdivision 2 is going to be for like constable vehicles. The following are authorized for use without permit on all law enforcement vehicles owned or leased by a Vermont Criminal Justice Council certified constable. So not like owned by a governmental entity, owned by a constable, provided that the municipality is not voted to limit the constable's authority to engage in enforcement activities. And they can only get the red signal lamp or amber signal lamp or a combination thereof. They cannot have the blue and white signal lamps for constables. And then just repeating the fact that if the municipality has voted to limit the constable's authority, then they can't run the lights when they're not doing their constable duties. But if they are also, for example, like a volunteer firefighter and they use the same vehicle, they could run those. And then
How would you know whether the municipality has voted to limit the
So-
constable's authority?
currently, they require the town clerk to have a certification, but since they're not having the permit anymore, there's not going to be the collection of that self-certification. You'll see that language struck out on
So they're
lines 13 to
taking
15.
Away one of the colored lights for constables?
I don't believe, that's the language.
Mhm.
And then you said you didn't need it anymore, that's why.
You don't need the permit anymore. Currently, constables can't get the blue and white lights. That's why it's split for the, these are the ones you can get without a permit for government vehicles, blue and white or red and white. And then for constables, the one you can get without a permit tracking existing law that they currently can get. If they get a permit, are the red and whites.
Don't need a permit for red and white. They can run blue if they get a permit.
They wouldn't be eligible for a permit. There are no longer going to be permits for law enforcement vehicles. They're not eligible for it under a permit now, and they wouldn't be eligible
So
for.
they can't use a blue light.
Right.
Okay. Looks good.
And then absolutely nothing is changing about what the emergency services vehicles can run or how they go about getting the ability to run them. The
Thank
permit
God.
would still stay the same for them.
And we spent a lot of time.
We did.
Okay, and then in the annoying way that statutes are, there are so many references to section 1252 with like subdivisions or subsections referenced, and because it's shifted a little bit with the split and amber signal lamps now being in subsection C, not subsection B, section 16 to 18 are exclusively cross-reference updates.
And hate to bring up a blue light question, but could you run a blue light on another vehicle, like on an ATV or a snowmobile, or is that,
Well,
ASD.
or, yeah,
I think if you were to have a law enforcement vehicle that is owned by the governmental entity.
And there are snowmobiles in the patrolling,
Right.
the sheriffs have them.
But I wondered if a ski area had snowmobiles that they use for patrolling or going around, and they wanted to put a blue light on it, could they?
Would you currently issue them a permit?
They're not-
Or do they need a permit?
Well, so there's the question of what's happening currently. It sounds like they wouldn't be issued the permit. And then there's the question of, let's backtrack and look at the new language and see if we think they would then be able to run it without a permit. And then if they can, the question is the DMV going to say, we think that there should be something saying they can only be on?
I just wondered, if the statute language about blue lights in vehicles, does that incorporate other vehicles that might be off-road, like an ATV or a snowmobile?
So I think what you would need to do, if you wanted to limit it just to like a car or a truck, because like the DMV has trucks for their enforcement vehicles, you would probably want to put in a definition for a law enforcement vehicle to say that it excludes things like snowmobiles.
I wouldn't want people to use the blue light for other vehicles.
So then maybe what you need to do is define law enforcement vehicle.
What do
Or
they
just have vehicle to encompass all vehicles.
But you said you wouldn't want it to be on things like
No, I don't want,
snowmobiles.
I mean, I want law enforcement to be able to use it for all vehicles, but I wouldn't want somebody to say like, I just want a blue light on my ATV. And, cause people when I pull up behind them to pull over
Yeah,
or whatever,
they
So,
can't,
I'm trying to sort this all out.
They can't.
they
So
can't.
we have, for example, the state police patrol boats, for compliance and speed and registration. And they also, enforce, particularly on the snowmobile trails, the speed and so forth. I don't know whether, and we actually help purchase some of that equipment. They would be permitted now to have a blue light, for either when they're doing the, boat on the lakes and on the snowmobile trails?
I was just kind of trying to scan through the form, so,
I don't know if they do, but would they be allowed to?
and that's the thing, I don't know if they currently do, one would assume they would, especially on the trails and stuff, but I don't know the answer specific to that. I don't see anything addressing it specifically in the statute. There are rules in small print, trying to read the form, see if there's anything else on there, but, I don't know who would police that.
The police would police themselves.
Right, well, it'd be similar to the blue lights on other vehicles, yeah.
So currently you would need to have the permit, but this would be saying you don't need a permit, but it says on all law enforcement vehicles. So then I think the broad definition of vehicle would say it could be on other things.
Like a boat, like a snowmobile.
But if you want to narrow it,
No, I don't,
Okay.
I don't want to
No,
know.
I don't want
then it's a question of whether the DMV is gonna try and convince you that you want to narrow it, and I don't know if they
No,
are.
I mean, I don't care about that, I just wanted to I wanted somebody that's not law enforcement not to use a blue light
Correct.
on a non-paved road vehicle.
So because so currently you have the DMV that is like serving as the gatekeeper because they're issuing permits. And you're saying, we're not having the permit for the blue lights, but they're limited to law enforcement vehicles. What you could do, and I think it would be to take one of Senator Kitchell's favorite phrases, a belts and suspenders approach, to then also include blue signal lights cannot be on any vehicle except for a law enforcement vehicle
But we
owned
do-
by a government.
But we do have,
Yeah, except that one fire.
without a permit, but then we did allow the fire trucks to
Right.
have it, and they're not law enforcement.
Correct, we would say except for the single rear blue light
You could
as
reference
allowed
that
under a
statute.
permit. Yeah, we would cross-reference the permit piece, unless issued a permit for the single blue light on the rear.
Well, if that's ambiguous, I would like to see that language.
Seems like lack of clarity comes back to haunt us. At some point, something comes up and.
Okay, so I'll add a specific prohibition on blue signal lamps except for law enforcement vehicles as allowed under subsection A, and the single blue signal lamp as allowed under subsection B, provided that a permit
And they
has been
don't need a
issued.
permit.
Single blue signal lamp on emergency vehicle
Do.
does need a permit. If you go with sections 14 and 15 in this version, no longer would need a permit if it's a law enforcement vehicle owned by the government, basically. And then the constable piece wouldn't be able to have blue lights, could have the red light, but they would not need a permit anymore. So a couple things are moving, but it's not changing anything about what can go on which vehicle.
Good.
Well, if Andy says okay, I'm worn down.
I'm talking about green lights again.
Green lights,
Green lights.
For the
Green means
balls.
go, right, Mazza?
green means go,
Go.
and purple means go, but you're going. but
You're going.
You're going, you're gone.
Gone.
We did have a request for that, you know.
Yeah. Okay, so we can get through the rest of the sections in the next 15 minutes?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so sections 19 and 20 and 22 and 23 are all like cleanup changes that should have happened last year when you were sort of addressing the change in the DMV practices where they were no longer going to be issuing the exempt vehicle title. So to like take us way back, not way back, take us back like 6 years, there was certificate of title that was available for vehicles that were not 15 years or older. And there was exempt vehicle title that was available for vehicles that were older than 25 years. And there was a gap. So like 3 years ago, we closed the gap to say you can get certificate of title if you're brand new to 15 years old. You can get exempt vehicle title if you're older than 15 years. Now with the modernization project, with the first phase having been completed, the DMV is issuing certificates of title to all vehicles. So you stripped away in statute references to exempt vehicle title. A few were just not caught. So sections 19, 20, and 22 are just getting rid of references to or exempt vehicle title that should have been deleted.
Okay.
Section 21 is different. So under 23 VSA, section 2012, it talks about the vehicles that do not need a certificate of title. And one of them was, and this is before the changes you made last year, and I'm on page 18 at lines 10. It said before the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill last year, a vehicle that is more than 15 years old. And there was a period there. It didn't say on January 1, 2024. You added in the on January 1, 2024 to basically grandfather in a vehicle. If it was an old vehicle on January 1, 2024, you weren't going to continue moving the line. And then suddenly it's going to be, you're going to be bringing in more vehicles that have aged out. It was a line was drawn in the sand for January 1, 2024. The DMV is saying that it really should be a line is drawn in the sand, but if there is a transaction, a certificate of title eligible transaction after that, change in ownership, then they should need to have a certificate of title once that transaction has occurred.
So that's what you're doing. So this just kind of would match statute to what the practice.
Correct. Our intent was this.
Yeah.
And this is the only section in the bill that would take effect at a different date other than July 1, 2024, and it would say retroactively to January 1, 2024.
Okay.
So in hearing more about certificate of title, just sort of a buzz in the building, the discussion here is going to be one of, was this the intent, and is there agreement on the fact that there's the intent to draw a line in the sand, and was the line supposed to stay there, or is the line kind of like supposed to be lifted if there was a change in ownership at some point in the future?
So obviously that 15 years, well, because we are dealing with a point in time after that, with everything is titled.
Correct. Our intent was to, let me say it this way, not punish individuals that have an older car in their garage that you registered this 92 maximum, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we were
Well, I
trying to avoid.
did, but I stopped a couple years
Correct, but
ago.
what we were trying to do was avoid saying to you, now you have to come get a title right now. You don't. You've registered prior to this law, you have a registration, and that is your proof of ownership. Should you sell me that 1992 car, When I come in and register it, the outcome of that registration will be it is titled. See what I'm getting at? So anybody who had registered prior to,
So, okay, so I have a 1972 Capri. It was registered, but hasn't been registered for a number of decades. I own it. I don't think I would have a title back
Probably
You
then.
have a registration.
well, wait, what year was
Would
it?
you have a record of my registration back into the 70s?
Well, we may, it depends, how long has it been since you haven't renewed? I mean, clearly.
Decades.
Right, clearly, we can't address every single situation, but what we did come up with is an affidavit that can be signed, so I would look
I bet
at
it's
you
in
and
the,
say,
I bet it would be in the glove compartment.
and it might be, and it might very well be. So,
Oh, but you can have an affidavit.
the interesting part is when I started at the department in 1989, we're titling vehicles 1972 and newer, so you may actually possess a title for that vehicle, because we probably had one during that time frame.
89?
89 is when I started, we were talking 71, 72 and newer, and then sometime in the 90s, we changed to 15 years. I don't know why, but, so there's a bunch of vehicles out there that have titles that, well, theoretically don't need them, but will in the future. That's not confusing.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm glad you're there to administer all this.
But if your vehicle just sits in the garage and you like don't sell it to anyone, it would still be more than 15 years old on January 1, 2024. And then this next part that has been registered in Vermont as has not had a change in ownership since January 1, 2024 would make it so that you don't need to then go out and get a
So what do I do
certificate.
with my 31 Chevy that has never been registered?
Affidavit,
Affidavit.
if you need a title. You might
Well, if
never
you wanted
use
to register it, the outcome would be a title, right? So we're titling all vehicles that we currently title, so.
But you would say, oh, to register this vehicle, we need the affidavit because you need a title.
Correct. Because there's no record of it anyway.
That's for sure. $100, the guy. Back in,
I'd say you're not gonna buy that for $100 now.
oh, and it hasn't been restored.
I'll buy it.
Why? You don't have any room in your garage.
I got it.
Build another.
All right, I need to have a conversation with you, Mike. I'm gonna start getting some of this stuff. Daniel's gonna
Happy to help.
yeah.
Okay,
Okay, sections 24 and 25 are gonna deal with vessels. So the changes to section 24 and 25, I believe were prompted by the most recent US Coast Guard audit, and they are having Vermont statute align either identically or more closely with the Code of Federal Regulations that are applicable here. So it's moving some things around. It's adding not less than for purposes of what the number of extinguishers are. So currently it says less than 26 feet. I'm at the very bottom of page 19, just as an example. Less than 26 feet in length, one extinguisher. It makes it seem like you can't have like more than. In the Code of Federal Regulations, 33 CFR, section 175.320, if you want to go look it up, it's a chart and it says not more than, or not less than, or a minimum of, I think is what it says. So this is making our statutes more closely aligned with the Code of Federal Regulations. The key piece that is new language that is coming from a different portion of the Code of Federal Regulations is what is added on page 20 at the very bottom, where it says notwithstanding subdivision 1, talking about motorboats with a model year between 1953 and 2017 that had a previously approved fire extinguisher. So they're not in compliance with the requirements that they be those certain classes that are laid out. They do not need to be replaced until such time as they are no longer in good and serviceable condition. And that comes directly from the Code of Federal Regulations. So basically saying, if you have a boat, 1953 to 2017, you don't need to go out and replace those fire extinguishers until they are no longer in good and serviceable condition. And putting that change in your statutes is entirely consistent with the Code of Federal
What
Regulations.
happens after 2017?
You're required to follow the subdivision E1. So they need to be either BI or 5B, and then the substituting.
Even though our existing statute
So the notwithstanding language in subdivision 2 would only apply to the model year between 1953 and 2017. You would have to follow E1 if it was a model year after 2017.
I guess my question is, are there some fire extinguishers on boats that were bought in 2018 that would be under the old rules as opposed to the new ones?
If they were, they would
have to be
not,
replaced.
they would have to be replaced, and they would not be consistent with federal regulations. If you look at the federal regulations, it splits it out as like prior to 1953, between 1953 and 2017, and 2017 to the present. So a grandfathering in of certain fire extinguishers consistent with federal regulations.
Just like your boat, Russ?
Well, I have to have a full-time firefighter.
Get your own.
Yeah, I mean, he gets a little warm when it's hot, but it's what it is. It's you know, it's what you gotta do.
And the other thing that I just want to point out is the notwithstanding language that's underlined just above lines 10 to 13 is subsection D. It looks new. It is not new. It has just been moved. So it was the beginning of subsection C, just seemed confusing there. So it's now been moved. So the only really new piece, aside from things that are sort of obvious, like you can have more than one fire extinguisher, is that grandfathering in piece in subdivision E2.
Okay, so that brings us to 25.
25. So under federal regulations, you give reciprocity for 60 days for a registration number from another state, and a registration number is invalid after 60 days out of the state. We have 90 days in statute. It is inconsistent with the Code of Federal Regulations. This is changing 90 days to 60 days. So if your boat is in Vermont for more than 60 days, you need to get a Vermont registration number. Last section, section 26. In, again, the Code of Federal Regulations, and the one line you see referenced on line 15, 49 CFR, you cannot have masking of violations for a commercial learner's permit holder or a commercial driver's license holder. What is masking? I don't know. It's not defined in the CFR. It bothers me. That's why it says in accordance with, in case there ever is a definition for masking there. But it's things like allowing it to be expunged or not reported, sealed. So this would.
Mask is a verb as opposed to a noun.
Yes. The act of masking.
To obscure, we're talking
Well,
about.
so yeah, basically to obscure, to hide. But we want to use masking because that's the word that's used in the federal regulations. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what it means because it's not defined in the Code of Federal Regulations.
Or why is it even there?
Oh, I can tell you why it's there. And that's because they want it to be pulled in the Commercial Driver's License Information System driver record, because you want to make sure that the people who are getting CDLs do not have these violations that happened and they're just not being reported because they're being obscure. Did I get that right?
Or like their photo, they're not recognizable, that kind of masking?
No.
More of their information.
No, it's their record.
Yeah.
It's really, because if you go through diversion, then you may not have that court record showing, but they're saying for the purposes of their CDL, they want to, right, they want to be able to have that.
And this has come up with initiatives in the building to have more things be expunged, and there's needed to be but the sort of exclusion for, but you can't do it for purposes of CDLs.
Good.
And then effective dates, we talked about this a little bit. Everything would take effect on July 1 of 2024, except for the grandfathering in of the older vehicles not needing certificate of title, except if there's that change in ownership piece. I think you could have some of the other sections, like the exempt vehicle title changes, be effective on a different date, but I don't know if you need them to. It's just sort of cleanup and correcting statute. So I would say that the only thing that needs to be effective on a different date is effective on a different date, and the balance, July 1 matches with the fiscal year.
Except the retro.
Except for the retroactive piece.
So when if somebody is not a CDL license holder and is just a regular vessel or a regular vehicle, it has a suspended license in other states. If it comes and asks for a license here, we wouldn't know.
We would, yeah, because we would run it in the national system. And based on the compacts, if you are suspended in another jurisdiction, we cannot license you here.
And
But you wouldn't necessarily know that they had like a moving violation if that had been expunged.
Right, but if their license was revoked, then you can't expunge that or mask
Right,
that.
so if we think about like the process, violations are something that's like adjudicated by the court system. The DMV can't say you have a moving violation, but the DMV suspends licenses. So if there is that violation, it could lead to the suspension. The DMV would have the record of that, but the violation could.
You might not know why, but you know they got their license revoked. There's no way to mask that, I'm hoping.
So if someone's license was currently suspended,
Like
I
in
do
another-
not think there's a way.
This is masking convictions, right? This is after the bad.
Right. Good. That's the way we want. We made it through the bill.
You made it through the bill with 1 minute to spare.
I don't want to drag us out. I still have some questions about this. I just can anticipate questions on the floor about expungement. So what is this saying for what we do expunge? I guess I need a primer on what we do allow for expungement relating to motor vehicles, and will this circumvent those rules? Before this goes to the floor, if I have to talk about this section, I'm gonna need a lot of information, please know.
Okay.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Hi. Mike, I think it would be really beneficial to outline the goal that we're trying to accomplish with the masking. We have annual audits conducted on how we manage the commercial driver's license system. And we have had findings for several years, Mike, is that a fair statement? That individuals that hold CDLs, because we're not, and I found, Anthea, you're interesting about the definition, that we are not, the courts and the state's attorneys and others are not entering into agreements on suspensions based on certain violations, and they are in fact masking those violations, and the federal government is saying they should not be. And that's really the goal. We're trying to align our statute to meet what the federal regulations are and expectations. And Mike, I don't know if you want to and that's the goal that we're trying to address, because we don't get fined, but we continually get cited for and are being asked to develop a plan on how we're going to.
Essentially a program audit finding.
Yeah.
An outcome of lack of compliance can be
Yeah,
4.8
sure.
of the federal highway.
If it's not addressed.
Correct.
So we're addressing it. Okay.
So all we're doing is complying with the federal, and federal law governs CDLs then.
Correct.
So there's a jurisdictional,
And each year during the audit process, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration looks at various different convictions, and they bring forward some that say, motor vehicles, you're on hook for the judge masking this conviction. And understanding the separation of government, I can't go to a judge and say you can't do that, right? So a law to support that would help push that forward.
Okay. Great. We can talk more about it. We'll be going
Thank
through.
you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And I will say for that, you might want to have one of my colleagues come in who staffs judiciary matters to talk about expungement, because I will be in your position where I will also be learning about what we currently allow.
Transporting marijuana, if it's legal in Vermont, is that like an expungement thing that's gonna be in a gray area worth considering? I would like to know.
only if they have a CDL.
Okay
I
with
mean,
this language.
this is only CDL.
This is only CDLs. So the first off
Could be a
is,
lot of marijuana.
So, number one, is it a CDL? Then you do sort of a decision tree from there.
Okay, well, we'll adjourn, but I had sent an email to the commissioner and Mike, so I can just tell you what it was in our discussion with Tom Quebec. We were talking about registrations and inspections. And I wonder if you have data, the number of inspections over the last 5 years?
So we do have, everything in the system. I'm having that information, run.
Okay,
For you to look at the 5-year. So I expect, I'm hoping to have it by the end of the day, but it could be Monday. So we are pulling that, for you. I will share with the committee really quickly, our vendor, has seen a decline. And, and they've actually done some informal surveys of, parking lots and different things just to, why is there a decline? They're trying to figure it out. And, I think, the simple way is people, not everyone are inspecting their cars, right away. And so we'll get you that information. And I think it's really important, just based on the conversation that occurred in your briefing. And I think Anthea can confirm this for you. Inspections, and stopping someone for an inspection, I think, is a secondary offense. So I know there was a comment made that maybe you could police more. I think it may be a secondary offense.
No.
The only secondary offense is adult seatbelts.
but
So you
there
could
is
be
a
stopped
bill
for
on
an
our wall to
inspection.
change that, but yeah.
Correct. And I think there's a lot of discussion and some other reports that really talk about looking at these as secondary offenses. So, I know you'll engage in the conversation, but we, I think just being aware of that is important. But I will get you that information.
I have another, while we've got you, people are complaining that they're seeing those temporary license plates that are printed off for long periods of time. And I thought, I wasn't quite sure, but did you say that now with the new systems that law enforcement would be able to enter, that information on that temporary and get data to confirm that it is in fact an unregistered vehicle?
Yes.
Okay.
How long are those allowed to be?
They're valid for 60 days.
But some people have said are on for months.
Yeah.
And so they're not getting them registered. So, but now law enforcement can immediately determine that they are not registered. Okay.
If they can read the number. I've seen some of them are kind of like curled up,
Oh,
whether.
well,
I think that's been.
but they can if they could stop them, I'm sure. All right, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I remember that.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see you again. Okay, unless there's any questions, we will adjourn for the day and the week.
And we have to go to the floor.